Hi. During the COVID era, it was very difficult to get really accurate data on deaths and cause of death and things like that. And there's a lot of sort of, I don't know, disputing about, why someone died and all these things. But one thing you can't dispute is that people did die. So I took a look at Stats BC. So fairly reliable, I hope, rate. And you can just search by deaths by community health service area for each year. And so I've done this and I've gotten the data from all these different regions across the province, and they give us the breakdown of deaths by month for each one of these cities. And I can go down here and get each one of these stats for each month of the year. And so I put those into an Excel file, and so here I've got the number of deaths for each month here, from January, February, March, from 2010 all the way to partway through 2023. And then what I did is I took those numbers and I divided them by the population of the province. So this is millions, so 4.47 million. So that over here, I've got data that is not just the number of deaths, but the deaths per million. So it adjusts for population. So we can compare year to year as the population of the province grows. And so this is a lot of numbers. So let's take a look at this in a graph. So if I look at this graph here, and if I go to 2010, we can kind of see a really consistent pattern where there's a few more deaths in January, it goes down in February, peaks a little bit in March, Roto-Reven declines, and then goes up again in the flu season to December and peaks in January. And this is really consistent across every single year. I've noticed that in the last couple of years, 2017, 2018, 2019, there was for whatever reasons, a slight increase in the death rate all the way to 2019. So I'm going to turn all those off and only turn on just an average. Here's our average for 2010 to 2019. So then what happens is COVID hits, and you'll see that the death rate is above the average. It's not hugely above the average. If I compare it to say 2019, it's a bit higher. So what we're seeing is not a huge number of deaths, but we're seeing more than ever. In fact, it would be the worst over 10 years. But even though it's the worst, it's not some staggering huge number like maybe the news was portraying. But anyway, this is what we see. So in 2021, two things are going to happen. One is we already have some excess deaths. There's people that were frail and weak and sick, especially elderly people, maybe in their 80s or 90s with health conditions. They might have lived for another year or two, but they sadly died from COVID in that year, and that's what most of these excess deaths is going to be older, weaker people. So then what we expect to see is that in 2021, two things happen. One, there's a lot of excess deaths in this year, so there'll be less deaths in 2021, as well as the vaccine got introduced. So when we go to 2021, that's exactly what we see. It's still a little high at this part of the year, and then it drops down. And then as the vaccine starts to take hold in May and June and July, we see the numbers dropping to almost normal death rates in the course of this year. In 2022, it's actually significantly below. And again, this is an averaging of the excess deaths that we saw in this couple of years here. And now towards the end, we're back to almost normal death rate at the end of 2022. And really, COVID is over, life is getting back to normal, and these are just normal rates. And in 2023, again, we're actually below normal for the first few months of this year. So this would be great if it was true, but it's not, because what I actually did is I took the data from all these years, and I actually had to manipulate this data to get the expected result. And I had to do that by multiplying the death rate in 2021 and 2022 and 2023 by a factor of 0.8. So I'm going to return that back to a 1. And this is the true numbers. This is the real numbers of death rate that we're seeing. And so let's take a look at how this impacts the data. I'm going to just turn on the average for a minute. And let's take a look again at this. Here's 2019. Here's 2020, a little bit higher. I'll turn off 2020. But now in 2021, when we expect it to drop, look what actually happens is that by the time we get to May, the death rate starts to go significantly higher. And now it's significantly higher than even at the height of the COVID pandemic in 2020. In 2022, it's actually even higher still. The death rate is higher in 2021 and 2022 than it was at the height of the pandemic in 2020, and much higher than the average from the previous 10 years. If I go to 2023, it's still really, really high, much higher than the average. I'll turn the average off. And this is the COVID pandemic at its worst. This is 2020. And now we've got all these excess deaths happening over top of this, the COVID pandemic, and much, much higher than the average that we saw overall. So these are the true numbers. I guess the question is, why are we seeing so many excess deaths when COVID appears to be over?